Getting information on all the mana signatures in the city, Shiro was surprised to see quite a few large signals gathered in one place. There were two that were especially powerful, as they stood head and shoulders above the rest. There was a third, but it seemed to flicker between being strong then weak, which confused her. But that wasn't where her attention was. Her attention was drawn to the strongest signal, which resembled Kanai's. If Lyrica could improve to the standard of heroes, it makes sense that Kanai can as well, Shiro mused to herself. Landing on the ground, Shiro glanced towards Nantian. Have you found her? He asked with a smile. I did. Surprisingly, she's actually the strongest person in this city right now. Shiro smiled as most of the people here were near the peak of Tier 4. For Kanai to be the strongest person here, she's either similar to Shiro in regard to the fact that they can kill people above their level, or that she had reached the peak of Tier 4. Perhaps even Tier 5, depending on her experiences. Oh, she's actually the strongest person here now? Nantian raised his eyebrow in surprise. Man, I wonder if she Before Shiro could finish her sentence, she felt Kanai's aura fluctuate as she seemed to grow weaker. Frowning slightly, Shiro looked toward Kanai's general direction. Seems like she's fighting with someone right now, she muttered with a frown. Let's go have a look at what's happening. We can give her a hand if she can't deal with it, Nantian suggested as Shiro nodded her head. Flickering from their spots, they quickly traveled towards where Kanai was. Breathing out heavily, a young girl could be seen holding her katana with a quivering grip. She had long black hair, red eyes, and looked to be around 13 to 15 years in age. She wore a black trench coat, a black shirt, shorts, some tights, and a pair of long boots. Right now, she was quite injured as blood dripped from her head. Besides, her was a woman who was currently kneeling on the ground with a pale face. She had long blonde hair and brown eyes. She wore a hooded coat that was buttoned up to her chin, shorts, tights, and boots. The two were currently on guard against the young teen in front of them who had a smug grin on his face. You should just give up already. Irina has already lost her powers, and there's no way you can beat me now in your state. The teen chuckled. He looked a little older than the black-haired girl as he had a sword in his hand and several magic circles in the other. If Shiro was here, she would immediately recognize the sword to be made from nanobots. Shut it, Gil. The girl spat out as she crouched down. Flickering in front of the teen called Gil, the girl swayed like a phantom and slashed towards his throat. Unfortunately for her, Gil kept a smile on his face and parried the blade off to the side. However, this was what the girl wanted as she shifted her weight and slammed her palm into his stomach. Bang! Forcing him back by a few steps, she slashed towards him once more. Clicking his tongue, Gil drew a rune in the air and ice chains lashed out towards the girl. Don't you dare use her magic, the girl hissed, slashing the chains apart as a black and red light trail flowed behind her katana. What can I say? Her powers have been most useful, especially this sword. Gil grinned. Stabbing the sword into the ground, a wave of nanobots lashed out towards the girl as she gritted her teeth and jumped back to avoid the danger. When I had sapped some of her power away, I didn't expect to get these robots as an additional bonus to her ice magic. I must say, when I first used this, it was quite dangerous. It tried to consume me too, but after a bunch of experimenting, I finally got it under control. Gil chuckled as the nanobots morphed back into swords just before they reached the girl, and slashed towards her. Rano! Parrying as best she could, the girl couldn't help but suffer a few injuries. Her power isn't for you to use. Someone like you should just go to hell. The girl glared at him as the red aura slowly traveled up her arm. I probably do deserve to go to hell, but I won't be going anytime soon. Gil laughed. Twisting the handle of his sword, the nanobots near Kanai detonated in an instant as her body was flung back. Bang! Crashing against the wall, she coughed up a mouthful of blood as the red aura continued to spread to the rest of her body. Once the aura wrapped around her completely, she disappeared from her spot and reappeared next to Gil with a red glow in her eyes. Gritting her teeth, she twisted her body and slashed as hard as she could. Smirking at her, he disassembled his sword and allowed the nanobots to wrap around the katana. I'll be taking that, he chuckled. Ping! Widening her eyes, the girl watched as her katana was consumed and snapped in half. Biting her lips, she let go of her sword and jumped back to avoid being harmed by the nanobots. You know, these robots are very helpful, and I mean very helpful. Now that they have eaten your sword, I can recreate it, you know? He chuckled as the nanobots surged around his hand and morphed into the katanas that the girl had in her hand a moment ago. Furrowing her brows, the girl was about to charge back in when a dominating pressure crashed down into the room. I was wondering about who you were fighting, but it turns out to be the kid that wanted to shake my hand. And what's this? He's even got nanobots now? A voice rang out as a portal opened up in the room. Exiting the portal with a smile, Shiro glared at Gil before snapping her finger. With her being a demigod, she could control nanobots at will. Naturally, this included the ones that Gil summoned. Plus, they were hers to begin with. Ping! Shattering apart in an instant, Gil widened his eyes in shock as he tried to summon more. But before he could, Shiro swiped up with her hand as a cage of nanobots appeared around him and started to sap away his mana. It's been a while, Kanai. Seems like you've grown quite a bit. You were still a little girl the last time I saw you. Shiro smiled softly as Kanai teared up. Shiro ni, she muttered as Shiro patted her head. Now then, how shall we deal with this kid, huh? Shiro asked as her aura exploded out and was directed entirely at Gil. Bang! Crashing against the wall of the cage, he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Perhaps I should just let the nanobots kill you, Shiro suggested, as his left arm was entirely shredded apart, and turned to nanobots. Argh! Crying out in pain, he wanted to summon a sword to cut off his left arm, but all that happened was his right arm being shredded apart as well. During their fight, Shiro had decided to watch for a short while to see how much Kanai had improved, and naturally, she wasn't pleased to see Gil having access to her nanobots. I'll leave his fate up to you, Kanai. How do you want me to deal with him? Shiro asked while glancing back at Kanai. Gritting her teeth, Kanai glared at Gil and opened her mouth. I want him to die painfully. She squeezed out while holding on to her injuries. Sure, you should close your eyes if you want, since the next part is rather gruesome. Activating her true spirit nature, Shiro summoned her lantern, but before she pulled out his soul, she snapped her finger. Crack! Exploding out of his chest, nanobots swarmed around and bloomed like a flower before shredding his body into mince. Summoning a few butterflies, his soul was dragged towards the lantern as a laugh could be heard. Ha 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 ha, I suppose you want me to torture this one a little more than the others, the ancient terror asked. Of course, you should send more people in here often. There's only so much fun I can get out of one or two people. He chuckled as Shiro only shrugged. We'll see. Dismissing the lantern once the soul was inside, she glanced at Kanai and the girl beside her. Encasing them in life fire, Shiro quickly healed their wounds. It seems like he was able to use your power, which was quite unfortunate for him, Nantian said as he leaned against a pillar and glanced towards the minced meat that was once Gil. Man, a real pity for him to use something I basically have full control over. Shiro chuckled with a shrug of her shoulders. Helping Kanai up with her friend beside her, Shiro could see that her complexion was much better than before. If I remember, that kid said that you lost your power. Did you get it back now that I killed him? Shiro asked curiously. Menin, I did. The girl called Irina nodded. So, what was with his deal? I didn't think powers could be stolen or copied, especially mine. Shiro narrowed her eyes as she glanced back at the mince. Apparently when he awakened, he had a special trait called leech. He's able to copy some of your abilities when he comes into contact with you. He's been building up his arsenal of skills from quite a while back, and when he shook his hands, during that party we had, he probably took your abilities, Kanai replied, before hugging Shiro as tightly as she could. Seeing this, Shiro only sighed and smiled softly. Patting her head, Shiro allowed Kanai to hug her some more. I've missed you, Kanai muttered. I've missed you too. Last time I saw you, you were still 10 and didn't have a class. What happened for you to grow so fast? I almost didn't recognize you, if not for your mana signature, Shiro asked with a smile. Well, I accidentally got stuck in a dungeon for a few years. Kanai looked up at Shiro and glanced to the side with slight embarrassment. Blinking her eyes, Shiro tilted her head. Pardon? I'll tell you later. Let's find somewhere we can sit down for now, Kanai said as Shiro nodded her head. Man, before that, care to introduce your friend? That kid seemed to have quite the vendetta against you two, Shiro asked. H. Right, sorry. This is Irina. She's Ilya's little sister. Irina, this is Shiro Ni. She's basically the one who taught me my martial arts. Kanai introduced, while holding on tightly to Shiro, since she hadn't met her in a long, long time. Nice to meet you, and thank you for your help. Irina bowed as Shiro nodded her head. By Ilya, do you happen to mean to the hero leading God's pantheon? Shiro asked as Kanai nodded her head. We're in a party right now. We didn't really need anyone else, since the two of us can handle most of the things alone. She's a mage that can heal and support from the backlines. Gil aimed for her first, since her skills are powerful, Kanai explained as Shiro nodded her head. Well, we can talk about that later. Should I take us out of here? Shiro asked with a smile. If you like, you can come to our flat and we can talk there. Irina offered as Shiro thought for a moment and nodded her head. Sure, tell me the address and I'll take us there. Finding out where Irina lived, Shiro dragged everyone into the rift and flickered to the flat. Upon arrival, Shiro could see that it was a relatively expensive-looking flat. Everything was well kept, and the space was rather large. Sitting in the living room, Kanai was about to ask if Shiro needed to take off her coat when she realized that Shiro was in a dress. Shrugging her shoulders, she placed her trench coat on the coat rack, and Irina did the same. Do you want anything to drink, Shiro-ni? We got hot chocolate, coffee, tea, or juice if you want. Kanai asked as Shiro asked for juice. Naturally, Nantian got the same, while Irina wanted some hot chocolate. Anobesh coming back. With the drinks on a tray, Kanai placed it on the table before sitting next to Shiro. Right then, what did you want to ask, Shiro-ni? Kanai asked with a smile, since it was quite nice seeing a familiar face after so long. Especially someone like Shiro. Well, my main concern is what happened to you. You said that you got stuck in a dungeon, and within the short span of less than a year, you went from a 10-year-old who followed me around to a level 200 war saintess? Shiro asked as she glanced at Kanai's title card. Kanai, LVL 200 war saintess. For a kid to have gotten this far, Shiro didn't even want to imagine how long she must have been stuck in there. Well, you see, I was stuck in a special dungeon, or rather quest, when I entered one of the dungeons. The quest was quite big, and I got a lot of rewards when I finished. But in terms of the years that I spent in there, I think I spent around 3 or 4 years to clear it. It was a long time for me, but when I came out, Mum was quite shocked how much I grew. Kanai scratched her head in embarrassment. I see. For a quest to take 3 years, it must have been hard then, especially since you were all on your own. Shiro sighed and patted her head. But during the time I kept reading the book you gave me, and it helped me survive. Kanai smiled while pulling out a book that's been in perfect condition. When I was in the quest, I kept practicing, and I became better at the martial art. I don't know why, but it felt really easy and fun to use. When I came out, I asked a few people, but apparently it just means I had talent for it. Kanai shrugged while showing Shiro the book. Tracing her finger along the edge, Shiro had a smile on her face. After all, their roles had reversed. Before, it was Feilin teaching her, now it was her teaching Feilin's reincarnation. And well, you have the aptitude for this specific kind of martial arts. I can teach you more if you want. Again, the same restrictions apply. Shiro smiled. Snapping her finger, nanobots surged in the space in front of them and morphed into pages before flowing into the book. Hey, this book was made from those little robots? No wonder it didn't seem to age, Kanai said as Shiro nodded her head. And it also allowed me to make it so that other people didn't steal the martial art. You were curious about why Gil was attacking us, right? Well, you see, Irina unlocked a really cool ability not too long ago, and Gil got greedy for it. He basically revealed what he was doing and told us how he could sap away people's abilities and skills. His goal would have been to kill the both of us and take our abilities, but you arrived so, Kanai explained as Shiro raised her eyebrow. Kid, must have watched too much anime or something. What kind of person just tells their enemies everything about their abilities and delays for no reason? Shiro asked with a confused expression. You'll be surprised. I've seen quite a few people who take pleasure in trying to instill fear through delaying the time. Nantian chuckled while drinking a bit of juice. A little sweet, but he didn't mind. They are who I call idiots. Shiro rolled her eyes. Didn't you do it once or twice? Nimue interjected as Shiro immediately ignored her with a cough. Poking her head out, Kanai narrowed her eyes at Nantian, who only smiled and gave her a small wave. Shiro-ni? Who is he? Kanai asked. A friend of mine. He's been traveling with me while everyone else in the party went to get stronger. Shiro explained briefly as Kanai nodded her head. Talking for a little longer, the two did some catching up while Irina could only sit at the side, feeling a little left out. After all, she didn't know the two powerhouses that suddenly appeared. Erg? Even Big Sis didn't feel this terrifying. Irina thought to herself as she remembered Shiro's aura from a moment ago. Shivering slightly, she sipped on her hot chocolate, while glancing at the big question marks next to Nantian's name. Understanding that this probably meant that he was around level 400 to 500, she could guess that he was stronger or on par with the heroes. She remembered that her big sis told her that heroes weren't the strongest around, since there are monsters amongst humans who are much more powerful. She was a little doubtful, but that doubt has been cast aside. Ah, right. How come you're in Russia? Shiro-ni, Kanai asked. Well, for 2 reasons, I guess. One is to find you, and the second is to bring you with me, Shiro said as she prepared to explain the new age to Kanai. She didn't mind Irina knowing, since she'll be telling the world government about this too. The world needed to prepare for a calamity. Eh? Bring me with you? Kanai tilted her head with confusion. There's something that's going to happen soon, so I'll need you to get as strong as possible, so that you can protect yourself and your family, Shiro replied as Kanai furrowed her brows. If you don't mind me asking, can we know what this thing that's going to happen is? If it is serious, I can get my big sister to make some preparations, Irina asked as Shiro nodded her head. Sure. I was going to go inform the government too, so that they can make an announcement about it. Do you know about the queens? Shiro asked while crossing her legs. I know some information. Irina nodded her head. What about you, Kanai? I know a little too, since I hang out with Irina quite a bit. I was there for some of the talks. Kanai nodded her head. Tell me what you know and I'll fill in the blanks. Nodding her head, Kanai started to explain to Shiro about what they know. Most of the knowledge was about the Queen's domains and their influence over people, but that was it. Nothing about anchors, their power, or their guard. While the government has discovered the next tier, Tier 6, no one has been able to reach it. Well, I suppose Tier 6 is hard to reach, but it's not impossible. You're looking at one right now? Shiro said, pointing at Nantien. Hey! Nantien smiled and created a Tier 6 magic circle. Seeing this, both Kanai and Irina widened their eyes in shock, since this was something that had just been discovered, and yet Shiro had someone who was Tier 6 beside her. Well, what do you mean it's not hard to reach? Irina asked as her sister has been stuck at the peak of Tier 5 for so long now. Well, I'm not even level 400 yet, and I get to create Tier 6 magic circles too. By the time I reach the peak of Tier 5, I should be able to break through quite easily. Shiro shrugged and made a Tier 6 magic circle too. Opening her mouth and closing it a few times, Kanai didn't know how to react. If it's so rare, why are there two of you? She thought with a forced smile. Though I'm not sure if I should publish the way to reach Tier 6 or not. After all, you know what human nature is like. The people that reach Tier 6 might have an elitist mindset which would only harm humanity as a whole. Shiro shrugged as both Kanai and Irina nodded their heads. If someone like Gil had become Tier 6, it would truly be bad news. Anyways, let me tell you about the queens as well as what is going to happen. Shiro smiled, taking a sip of the juice and raising her eyebrow at how nice it was. Shiro asked for more before explaining everything they knew, such as the queen's roles, their guards, how they operate, as well as the fact that demons and gods will arrive. Of course, Shiro left out the fact that she was the queen right now since she didn't want to declare it to the world. If she did, the other queens could easily find out her identity through the internet. She didn't want to lose this advantage just yet. Hearing about everything that's coming in a short period of 5 months, Kanai's face paled. Shiro-ni, is this true? She asked as Shiro nodded her head. I've experienced a few visions and quests that show what initially happens and what will happen. It doesn't look good. Shiro frowned while making a hologram of what she had seen. Of course, she left out the parts where it showed her participation in their future. Seeing the future, the two girls didn't have good expressions as the outcome was not exactly positive. Taking a deep breath, Irina pardoned herself as she wanted to tell her sister. Nodding her head, Shiro agreed since it would be good if her sister came to talk in person. After Irina was gone, Shiro snapped her fingers, and a small barrier was formed. You can ask me what you wanted to ask now. Shiro smiled softly since she could tell that something was on Kanai's mind. Ah, you found out. Kanai chuckled. Of course. You know I'm sensitive to my surroundings. So what is it? Shiro asked with a smile. I just want to know your part and all. Of this Shiro-ni? For you to know this much, it means that there is something you need to do, and it's very important. Kanai asked as Shiro thought for a moment before nodding. Ranavesh, there is. Remember how I said that there were queens from different worlds? Well, I'm the queen of this world. For us to survive, I need to defeat the rest of the queens. I wanted you to get stronger so that you can protect yourself as well as your mother. After all, it would be quite sad to see you well. Fall in battle, I suppose. Shiro sighed. I know that queens have subjects, so am I able to be part of your kingdom or something? With what I know, you're our planet's last hope, right? If you die, then everything is over. I know how powerful you are, Shiro-ni, so I can trust that my mum would be safe with you. Plus, I can also help out and do my part for our world. Kanai smiled as Shiro thought about it for a moment before nodding her head. You know, being near me is dangerous, right? Sure, I'm powerful, but my enemies are just as powerful, if not stronger, Shiro said while raising her eyebrow. I know. But you inspired me, and it was you who also helped me survive this long, so I have a debt towards you that I want to pay off. Kanai smiled while glancing at her book. And how about this, then? If you do come under me, I only have one job for you, and that is to keep people safe in the city while we go out for expeditions, okay? I know it sounds boring, but we need someone to guard the city, Shiro suggested as Kanai furrowed her brows before nodding her head. She understood that she was nowhere, near ready to go out on the front lines considering the large power difference. Going there would only be suicide. Plus, guarding the city wasn't bad either, as she can keep an eye on her mum and keep her safe. I imagine that's fine. Kanai nodded her head. Good. I don't have a domain just yet, but I do have something called a celestial court. If you join the royal court, you get several bonuses that are proportionate to how powerful I can. You should get some decent boosts. Shiro smiled. Naturally, Kanai agreed to join the court. Performing the ritual that was needed for her, Shiro saw her name appear on the court list. Celestial Court Knight, Kanae. The person given this role will receive the following benefits. 120% of the Empress's STR, AGI, and Dex stat. Holds a 20% armor, dodge, magic, penetration. 140% boost to stats. While performing a task given by the Empress, as a Celestial Court Knight, you are able to tap into a portion of the experiences the Empress has to aid you in battle. Examples of experiences are Sword Domain, Boundary, and War Saint. Reading the description of Celestial Court Knight, Shiro was quite surprised that Kanae could get some experience of her using Boundary to help her in battles. However, Kanae didn't know the usefulness of this just yet, as she was looking at her STR, AGI, and Dex stat jump up tremendously. Shironi, aren't you a mage? Why are these stats so high? Kanae asked. I know I'm a mage, but they're low compared to my INT stat, you know? Shiro chuckled. Understanding where this was going, Nimue wanted to warn Kanae, but it was too late. How high is your INT stat? Kanae asked. Around 100 million points or so. Shiro shrugged. Hearing this number, Kanae spaced out in shock. And you broke her? Great. Nimue rolled her eyes. Oh, I'm sure she'll be fine. It's better for her to start getting used to it now if she's going to stay with us for a while. Shiro chuckled. While Kanae was trying her best to process the information, Irina returned with someone behind her. It is nice to meet you, Miss Shiro, or rather, shall I call you Miss Asakura? My sister has told me about some of the things that you have shared with the two of them. The woman smiled as Shiro raised her eyebrow. I presume that you are the current leader of God's pantheon, Ilya, right? Shiro smiled. That is indeed who I am. Ilya nodded her head. She was a relatively tall woman with long blonde hair and piercing brown eyes. Much like what Kanae and Irina wore, she also wore a trench coat, some shorts, tights, and boots. Feeling her aura, Shiro could tell that Ilya was rather prideful and that she clearly wanted to have the upper hand in this talk. Do you have any proof about the things that you have said? This is a serious case, so I will be needing proof, otherwise God's pantheon won't be able to do anything. It'll be rather difficult to convince them to act without having proof, Ilya said as she sat down on a chair. You want proof? Well, I don't really have any proof, except for what I've seen as well as the information I have gathered from the system. Shiro shrugged. Oh, you have gathered information about this new age from your system? How did you do that? If we can also draw information from the system, we'll be able to prove the liability of your statements, Ilya asked as Shiro frowned. In her head, since she was rather demanding. You want to know how to gather information from the system? Do it yourself. I'm not going to serve you everything on a platter just because you're the leader of a faction. You know that, right? If you think I am going to do that, then you are belittling me quite a bit. Shiro narrowed her eyes as sparks seemed to appear as the two glared at each other. Seeing this, Irina panicked since this wasn't what she wanted to happen. She understood that her sister seemed demanding, but she had to be that way otherwise. She won't be the leader of God's pantheon. Glancing towards Kanae, Irina saw that she was rather relaxed and just checked her phone while the two were having a stare-off. Aren't you worried? Irina whispered over while gesturing at the stare-off. Min? Well, I know that Shironi is nice, so she wouldn't do anything too drastic, so long as you don't push her buttons. She even shared this important information with us after all. I think whether or not your sister believes her, Shironi has done her job by providing the information. The rest is up to your sister, so it's not a case of being worried of Shironi, but rather, will your sister back down, I suppose? Kanae shrugged, before gesturing towards Ilya. Glancing towards her sister, Irina was surprised to see that sweat seemed to roll down her face as she eventually sighed and closed her eyes. I see. I will attempt to persuade the gods' pantheon. Is there anything we should do before the age of demons and gods arrive? Ilya asked. You got about 5 months to make everyone as strong as possible. That's about it. There's nothing else, other than to get as strong as you can. You probably want to stay in a dungeon for a bit longer so that you can extend the time. I know this is asking for a lot, but the best case scenario would be that everyone can clear a dungeon solo and try to get as much EXP as they can. It's impossible to get everyone to the peak of Tier 5, but try get as close as you can. For those that are already at the peak, aim for Tier 6 if you can, since the enemies in the New Age are much stronger than the enemies we face now. Tier 6 is just the beginning, as there will be Tier 7s and 8s among us. Just so you know, Tier 7 is demigod and Tier 8 is god, Shiro explained as Ilya nodded. Are you able to give any hints about reaching Tier 6? I suppose I can, but I want to wait until I can get the government to listen to me, I suppose. Once they tell everyone about the New Age, I'll get them to publish some hints about reaching Tier 6 with some demonstrations, I suppose. 5 months should be enough for the talented ones to reach Tier 6, Shiro replied. However, if there are any dipshits that decide to abuse their tier 6 power, me and Lil Tien will deal with them personally. Shiro narrowed her eyes as Nan Tien agreed. Talking for a little longer, Shiro decided to leave since there was still much to do. Do you want to come with us? I can get my mom or dad to train you during the 5-month period we have left. Plus, I can also get Helion to make you a new weapon since your old one had been broken, Shiro asked. Would Irina be able to come with us? Kanai asked while glancing back at her friend. She can if she wants to. I'm sure my parents wouldn't mind training her. Shiro nodded her head. However, it's really up to her and her sister. She shrugged as Ilya stood up. It would be her honor to be trained by your parents, as not many get this chance. However, I will leave the decision to Irina, as she is her own person. Ilya smiled. In that case, then I want to train with Kane. Irina said since she had seen how strong Shiro was. If she could get stronger, she could be more reliable on the battlefield. Ovi, seeing this, Shiro only smiled as it reminded her of Sylvia when she first joined the party. Sure, I'll contact you later about her progress. Shiro smiled as the 4 of them left the apartment. Once she was alone, Ilya sighed and sat down heavily. During their stare-off, she felt like she was sitting in front of a powerful monster as her aura gave her the feeling of death. Should she do anything out of line, she would definitely die. Taking a deep breath, Ilya calmed herself before calling for an emergency meeting with her faction. After all, she needed to tell them about what she knows. Before we go to my parents' house, we're going to make a small detour. Shiro smiled. Where are we going? Kanai asked. Just a small trip to the world government. We're acquainted, so they should be rather familiar with me. Shiro chuckled as Kanai nodded her head. However, Nantien only shook his head. You might want to brace yourself for what Shiro does. A tip is to imagine the most insane thing she can possibly do and use that as a baseline, Nantien said as both Kanai and Irina tilted their heads. What? It's not like she's going to attack the government now, is she? Irina asked as both Nantien and Shiro stayed silent and looked forward. Without saying anything, they teleported away with Kanai and Irina in tow. Arriving at Larit, Shiro and Nantien made their way back to the previous spot they were in when they were checking out the city. Sit down here and wait for a bit. I'll sort it out quickly. Shiro smiled as the 2 nodded their heads. Flying into the sky, Shiro immediately released her aura as both Kanai and Irina widened their eyes in shock. Is she trying to pick a fight? Irina shouted out in shock. Yes and no, just trust her. Nantien sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her from going forward. Are you just going to watch her? Irina frowned. Yes, and I have done so plenty of times. Just trust me. And watch. Enjoy the show if you can. Nantien smiled. Suddenly, a portal opened up as a young man appeared before them with a forced smile. Seems like you have decided to come back rather quickly, he said with a forced smile. He couldn't help but curse the old geezers that forced him to come talk to her after what she had done last time. Don't be so scared. I came with some information this time. Of course, we can have a proper fight if you want. I destroyed your portals before you could use them last time, didn't I? How about I let you use your spells first? Shiro grinned. I'll be fine. So, what information did you want to share? Well, rather than share, perhaps you'd like a USB instead. It's kind of annoying to tell the same story multiple times. Shiro chuckled as she created a USB and threw it towards the man. Catching it with a frown, he sighed and nodded his head. Is there anything else you want to tell us? He asked. Not really, except that you probably want everyone to be as high-leveled as possible. You'll understand why when you see this stuff on the USB. That, and also share the resources around a bit more. Aside from that, nothing else. Shiro smiled. That, and also your friend seems to be quite excited. Why not come out and introduce yourself? Shiro smiled and snapped her finger. Suddenly, tens of nanotech needles appeared and shot towards an area. You found me? Not many people can. A voice rang out as a man quickly landed on the ground. Looking at him, Shiro was rather surprised to see that he was a dark elf with silver hair like Shiro. His physique was similar to Nantien's and that it seemed thin, but Shiro could tell the power packed in his body. Well, it's quite obvious to someone as sensitive to mana as I am. I'm sure you heard of what happened with your friend, so care to explain to me why you seem to trigger happy? Shiro chuckled while pointing towards his bow. Well, it's not often. People like us run into someone stronger. I want to give it a shot. The dark elf narrowed his eyes as Shiro shrugged. Sure, entertain me. Just as she said this, hundreds of mana arrows appeared around Shiro as she instantly summoned Sylvanas and cut the arrows in half. However, just as she did this, each arrow released a shockwave as Shiro countered with a shockwave of her own created with the compression of mana. Damn, your reaction speed is insane. The dark elf's voice rang out as he appeared behind her with 2 short swords. Twisting his body, a whirlwind of slashes surrounded Shiro as she stabbed her sword into the ground. Suddenly, a cage of nanobots erupted out and blocked the slashes. They barely left shallow marks as the nanobots healed up in an instant. Seeing this, the dark elf couldn't help but chuckle and hop back. Connecting his short swords together, they merged into a bow again as he fired several shots towards Shiro while dashing around her. Swiping out with her sword, Shiro was about to cut the arrow in half when it switched locations with the elf. Stepping on her sword, the elf slashed towards her. Bending her body back, Shiro watched as the sword brushed against her hair, which was rather surprising since it had been quite hard for people to come close to hitting her unless they heavily outclassed her in stats. Summoning a few daggers, she had them pierce towards her, but his place switched with the arrow once more. To her surprise, the arrow had continued to travel towards her when they were dodging each other's strikes, so when he switched, he reappeared behind her with a sword. Cutting towards head, smirking slightly, Shiro activated Keitoma as his body froze up for a moment, allowing her to adjust herself. Such a tough-to-hit opponent. The dark elf shrugged when the paralysis wore off. If I wasn't hard to hit, I would have died by now with my defenses. Shiro humored him, as he had given her a relatively good workout compared to what others have done. Well, care to go for a little longer then? He asked as Shiro nodded. Narrowing his eyes, he crouched down and slammed his hand against the ground. Suddenly, a Tier 5 magic circle expanded out in an instant, but Shiro wasn't surprised. Stomping down, she shattered the spell in an instant, but the dark elf only smiled. As the shattered Tier 5 magic circle floated in the air, they converged together and reassembled themselves into a shadow of Shiro, which caused her to raise her eyebrow. Oh my, I didn't think a person could actually get a skill like this. Interesting. Shiro smiled as her shadow seemed to have the same equipment as her, but they felt weaker in comparison. I got lucky with this skill. But what kind of monster are you? The shadow will always be weaker than the original by quite a bit, but despite that, your shadow is stronger than most of the members we have. The dark elf narrowed his eyes as he dashed towards her with the shadow besides him. I'll keep that a secret. Shiro smiled. Raising her sword, she parried her shadow's strike as ice chains erupted out from the ground. Pivoting on her foot, Shiro summoned a dagger and destroyed the chains in an instant. But just as she did this, the dark elf appeared in front of her and slashed with her short sword. Just as she stepped back to dodge, she felt danger all around her as it was similar to how her boundary worked. Snapping her finger, a mana barrier. Wrapped around her, ripples could be seen across the surface, but the barrier was not harmed. Geez, if my next attack doesn't work, then I surrender. Jumping back, the dark elf grabbed his short swords and flicked them into reverse grip. Stabbing it into each arm, Shiro raised her eyebrow when light blue runic tattoos appeared on his body. Separating from his body, 2 illusionary images of him slowly materialized as he pulled the swords out. Stomping down, darkness expanded out. In an instant, as it wrapped the 2 of them in an arena where no light could be seen. Oh, you poor man. Shiro sighed, since this was actually beneficial for her. Sighing softly, she dismissed her blade as her stats had just been multiplied. Her sword was no longer necessary. Raising one leg, she kicked out besides her before pivoting on her other foot. Slamming her palm into the chest of one of the phantoms, she slammed the ground as ice spikes erupted out with her in the center. Ping! Shattering the darkness with ease, Shiro could see the dark elf retreating, but combat halted. I'll be honest, you surprised me. You actually made me bleed. Shiro smiled while raising up her right hand. There were several cuts on her right hand as flames wrapped around them, and they were healed in an instant. Goodness, when did the young miss of the Asakura family become such a monster? The dark elf sighed as he sat against the ground. The entirety of his back and left arm had been frozen as he was caught by a single ice flake that he didn't manage to dodge. I kinda have to. Shiro shrugged and thawed the ice before healing him. Since you actually proved to be quite talented, why don't you tell me your name? Shiro asked as he had impressed her quite a bit. Grangle Lunarius. Gangle replied, while standing up. Take this. Catching the thing that Shiro threw, Grangle was confused as to what she had just given him. It's a skill chip of one of my skills. It's a little weaker, but it shouldn't be too bad. Just place that chip on an accessory, and you'll be able to use the skill. Of course, if you do shady stuff with it, I'll know. Shiro narrowed her eyes as Grangle glanced at the description and widened his eyes. Kiyotoma, it was the same skill that Shiro had used to freeze his body, as it would be quite helpful for him, especially for the last attack that he used against her. Turning around, Shiro walked back to the trio that had been waiting. We're done here. Let's go. Shiro smiled as they nodded their heads. Opening a portal to the rift, they disappeared from the area. Once they were gone, Grungle sighed. Goodness, Tell the old geezers that we should work under her if we can. She's crazy strong, he said while applying the chip to an earring he had. Work under her? Yup. Grangel nodded his head and disappeared from his spot. I'm surprised that you actually gave him a chip with a skill on it, Nimue said as Shiro shrugged. He impressed me, which is rather hard considering my expectations. Naturally, I would reward that. Plus, it also gives me a means of monitoring the government, so it's a win-win. He will be a rather helpful ally in the new age, Shiro replied. True. Look at you being generous now, ha 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 ha. I'm always generous. Of course, only to people that I care about and those that impress me. Shiro shrugged since she wasn't stringent about giving things to people. The main thing is that they had to impress her first. Arriving at the teleport shrine, Shiro decided to go back home first before going back to the spirit capital since she wanted to introduce the two to her parents. First, teleporting to the city of Asakura, Kanai was surprised when Shiro revealed her identity to her. Finding out that she was the infamous Kuromi Asakura, who destroyed a person's manhood quite often, Kanai couldn't help but wonder if Nantien had been hit yet. So, you managed to get your memories back? Kane asked while they were walking through the city. It took a while, but I remembered everything. Shiro smiled. That's good. Me and my mom were worried about you and your family. They could have been looking for you, and you wouldn't have known since you didn't have your memories. But since you have gotten your memories back, and now you know who your parents are, we don't have to worry anymore, Kanai said with a smile, as Shiro patted her head. How thoughtful of you, she chuckled. But don't worry, even if I didn't get my memories back, I had found some information about my family, so I could have searched for them. Nodding her head, Kanai followed Shiro through the city. Seeing the respect they had for Shiro, Kanai was rather surprised. However, since the city was basically named after their family, she couldn't understand why they would have respect for Shiro, rather than the Asakura family. Arriving at the house, Shiro could sense 2 mana signals in the house as she understood that her parents were home. Seems like we've come at a good time. Both my mom and dad are home. Shiro smiled. Mom! Dad! I'm home, Shiro called out as Kanai could hear 2 people dashing towards them. Welcome home, Mio called out as she hugged Shiro. Oh my, this time you brought back a husband and 2 children. Are they adopted, or are they yours? Mio asked, while looking towards Kanai and Irina. No, Mum, they're not my children, and Lil Tien isn't my husband. Shiro sighed while face-palming. Oh well, isn't that a shame? She's quite cute too. Mio smiled while patting Kanai's hair, who blushed slightly from embarrassment. Can we talk inside? Shiro asked. Oh, of course, come in. Leading Shiro and the group to the living room, they could see Shiro's father sitting on the sofa, giving them a small wave. Welcome home. Did you do what you wanted to do outside? Koji asked. I did. That's good. So who are these people? One looks Japanese, a Russian, and a masked one, Koji asked while glancing at the guests. Kanai is someone I met when I lost my memories. She's like a little sister to me. Irina is someone I've met recently, and she's Kanai's friend. As for the masked one, you should recognize him as Lil's Tien, the one you helped when he was younger. Shiro smiled as she elbowed Nantien in the ribs. Why do you still have your mask on? She frowned. Sorry. It's nice to meet you again, sir. Thank you for helping me all those years ago. Nantien smiled as he took off his mask. Oh my, he's quite the looker, isn't he? Mio said to Koji, as Kanai was shocked at Nantien's appearance. As well? The little shat who made Shiro pick magic? Koji nodded as Mio smacked him on the head. Don't call our guests little shot. She frowned as Koji quickly apologized. Well, it's the young man who forced Shiro to pick magic then. Koji forced a smile as Mio rolled her eyes. Ignore your dad. Anyways, what do you need our help for? Mio asked. Oh, you knew? Well, of course I would know. I'm guessing it's a similar situation as to what happened before with your party? Mio asked. I was wondering if you and Dad could train these two since the new age is going to arrive soon. Kanai is someone important to me, and Irina is her friend, so I hope they can get better at fighting in order to protect themselves. Shiro nodded. Sure. Do you know when exactly will the new age arrive? Mio asked, since she wanted to know the time frame that they're working with. I do. We have 5 months left. Shiro nodded as Mio furrowed her brows. Only 5 months, huh? It'll be better if we take them to a dungeon then. That way we have more time to train them if we want them to be trained up to standard. Mio frowned. Kanai is a physical fighter who uses a katana. Her weapon was broken not too long ago, so getting her a new blade for now should be fine. I'll be getting Helion to craft her a blade later, so you don't have to worry about that. Shiro said, and Mio nodded her head. All right, what about the other one? What kind of fighter is she? She doesn't seem to be a physical fighter, Mio asked while pointing at Irina. You're a support class, right? Shiro asked as Irina nodded her head. I am, Irina nodded. Basically the self-defense training for Sylvia Dad. Shiro shrugged as Koji nodded his head. Feeling a shiver down her spine, Irina couldn't help but feel as though she was in a lot of danger. However, that feeling disappeared quickly. "Oh, right. How are you in terms of fighting now?" Koji asked curiously. While his daughter is a mage. He didn't want her to slack out on fighting. "Fufu, it's funny you should ask. Perhaps I'm better than you in terms of technique now?" Shiro chuckled as Koji raised his eyebrow. "Ho, ho. Are you saying you want another spar with your old man?" Koji asked with a grin. "Perhaps." Shiro shrugged, as she decided to go to the dojo with Koji. Pulling out a random sword, Shiro waved it a few times. With Item Master activated, she can use this to its full potential. "Ready, Dad? I can assure you, I'm not like I was before." Shiro smiled as Koji nodded. "I'm sure your old man can handle it." Glancing towards her mother, Shiro waited for the start signal as Kanai and Irina was waiting by the side, while Nantian only mouthed the words, "Don't hurt him too much." "Go." Giving the command, Mio watched as Shiro disappeared from her spot. Activating Boundary immediately, Shiro followed it up with Keitoma. Feeling his body freeze, Koji was shocked to sense danger all around him as blade marks could be seen. After a short pause, he could move his body once more as shallow sword marks could be seen on his vest. "See?" Shiro grinned as Koji couldn't help but feel excited. "Damn, why do you have to be a mage? If you were a warrior, this would be so much better. But let's see how you fare in terms of defense." Koji laughed. Flickering next to Shiro, he slashed towards her as she used her boundary to counterattack since it didn't work well in defense. It was similar to what her mother had done when they fought since she slashed after her bullets as a defensive maneuver. Parrying her father's blade to the side, she slashed towards him once more as he quickly stepped to the side and parried the invisible blades. Watching the two exchange attacks, Kane couldn't help but widen her eyes. It made her question whether or not Shiro was actually a mage, since this was something a mage shouldn't be able to do. At least, that was what most people believed. Neither of them have shown their true power. This is just their basic techniques and some skills. I can say for sure that I'm not confident that I can defeat Shiro in a one-on-one fight, even though I'm a whole tier above her, Nantian said as Kanai looked up. "Have you fought her at all?" she asked. No, properly no, but I wouldn't want to." He chuckled. Unlike the first time that they had spared, Shiro was actually able to fight to a standstill with her father, which surprised him as Shiro was the same. After all, Boundary was something extremely hard to fight against. Thanks to her. Father's stats and instincts, he was actually able to defend against her to some extent. His way of defending against such attacks was actually to put pressure on her so that she couldn't attack as much as she wanted to. Understanding that the weakness of her Boundary was that she had no defenses, Shiro understood that she should work a little more on her guard. Finishing the spar on a stalemate, they decided to have some dinner before talking about anything else. "You've definitely improved, but your defenses are still on the weak end. If you want to focus on attack only, the best thing is to probably ignore defenses completely, since by pressuring you, I can reduce your chances of attack," Koji said, as focusing on all-out attack has its boons, especially for people like them who are heavy offensive fighters. Well, with the people that I face, I kind of need to have some defense, otherwise I'll be heavily injured." Shiro shrugged as Koji understood what she was worried about. Well, I'm sure you'll figure out the best way to fight later. For now, though, let's just enjoy this meal." "So what are your plans now?" Koji asked while having a mouthful of rice. "Don't talk while you've got food in your mouth." "But yes, like your dad said, what are your plans now?" Mio asked curiously. "Well, since Kanai and Irina will be under your guidance for now, I think I'm going to be taking a trip to the spirit capital and sort out everything else. I also need to set up the anchor in the main city." Shiro sighed, since there's a lot of work for her. "There's also Madison's situation, and I need to see an old friend later," she muttered, remembering that she needed to look for Acelia in China. Seeing this, Mio patted her head. "How about we take a trip to your mother's home for a bit? Your grandma has been rather eager about looking for you." Mio smiled as Shiro immediately sat up. She had always been curious about her mother's family, and now she had a chance to find out more. However, with so many things on her plate, she wasn't sure if she could cram it all in within the short time of 5 months. "Can you tell me more about them?" Shiro asked as Mio only chuckled. "Not yet. I'll tell you when we go." "Ugh. I have so many things that I need to do. I don't even know if I can fit it in within 5 months." Shiro complained as Kanai couldn't help but giggle at Shiro, since to her, Shiro had always been this refined older sister whom she looked up at. But right now she was almost like a cute little sis. "The trip to your grandparents won't take 2. Long, darling. At most, it'll take a week. At the minimum, it'll take 3 days. Mio chuckled. "Oh, that short?" Shiro asked with confusion. Their situation is a little special, so meeting them for long isn't possible. Mio nodded. Has Dad met them? Shiro asked as Koji coughed. Well, your dad kidnapped me from my home, so I don't think my parents want to meet him anytime soon. Mio laughed as Koji forced a smile. Context, hun. Context, Koji said as Mio only shrugged. While your dad trains Kanai and Arena, we can go meet your grandparents. It shouldn't take too long. If you want, you can even bring your friend with you. Mio smiled while pointing at Nantian. Ranba, he can come too? Shiro asked while glancing at Nantian, who was equally as surprised. Amen. Of course, the choice is yours, darling. He can come along if you want him to. Mio smiled, scratching her head. Shiro looked at Nantian. Well, do you want to come? I don't have anything else to do, so I don't mind. Of course, if you want to meet your grandparents alone, then that's also fine. Nantian smiled. Well, I guess you're coming with us then. When do we go, Mum? Shiro asked. We can go after we finish this meal. Finishing the meal rather quickly, Shiro was excited to see her grandparents, since there was no information from them. She also wanted to know the story of her parents and how they met since, from what she knows, her father had taken her mother away from home. Helping up with the washing, Shiro watched as Koji took Kanai and Arena away to the dojo, while her mother led them through the house. We're going to be teleporting to somewhere else in order to meet your grandparents. You don't have to be too formal, but don't be rude either, okay? Mio said as Shiro nodded her head. Exiting out of the back of the house, Mio stomped down as a foreign magic circle lit up and a path underground opened before them. I would have loved to take your sister, but unfortunately your grandparents only showed interest in you rather than the both of you. Though I'm sure your sister will get the chance to talk to your grandparents in the future. It's just a matter of time now, Mio said as Shiro nodded her head. Follow me. Waking down the steps, they could see a portal open up as Mio cut her finger and dropped some blood on the floor. Suddenly, red runes lit up around the portal as the mana signatures started to change. Normally, this would act as a normal portal to different locations, but with the key, it links directly to where your grandparents live, Mio explained as Shiro raised her eyebrow. This is bloodline coded, isn't it? If I did it, I think I can also work as a key, Shiro asked. Indeed. However, you also need permission from the other side, otherwise you won't be able to access it. Now follow me. Mio smiled. Entering the portal, Shiro could see that they were immediately teleported to a mana-rich area, as she could feel her body become invigorated. Looking up, she could see that there were several floating islands in what seemed to be the void, as there was just the infinite stretch of space beneath the islands. Glancing back, she saw that they were currently standing on an island that had a large portal situated in the center. Welcome to where your grandparents live. Nosvardi, Mio said as she bit her finger and drew a rune in the air. Suddenly, runes started to light up on her body as she activated something similar to her true spirit nature. Wrapping herself in a black and red dress, Mio smiled. Shiro, I want to ask you something, Mio said as Shiro tilted her head. Mom? What is it, Mum? The only reason why your grandparents want to meet you so eagerly is because you started to interact with souls now, haven't you? Your affinity with souls should have increased tremendously, otherwise my parents wouldn't place much importance in us, Mio asked as Shiro nodded her head. You know that I'm a spirit now, right? Shiro said as Mio nodded. You have indeed told me that before. Well, my true spirit nature, something that represents a spirit's power, is related to souls, Shiro explained as Mio raised her eyebrow. That makes sense. With my blood flowing in your veins, it's only a matter of time before you awaken, something that has a link with souls. Mio smiled. What do you mean? Remember how I told you that I'll explain about my circumstances later? Well, you can think of my role as being the harvester of souls. There are certain times when anomalies appear, and our family specializes in dealing with the anomalies, such as a soul that can possibly threaten the world or some such. We deal with the anomalies and make sure they cannot reincarnate. We are part Reaper, hence why most of our classes are titled as such. You can also say that we are a race of Grim Reapers and our main affinity is with souls. Mio explained as Shiro raised her eyebrow in surprise. So you're not human? Shiro asked. Nope. Your father is, but I'm not. Your grandparents work with the system in Hades to keep the souls in order, hence why their situation is a little complicated. There are certain restrictions after working so close to a god that meeting them is very difficult. Now come, your grandparents should be waiting right now. Mio smiled as semi-translucent steps appeared before them one by one. Following her mother, Shiro was digesting the information when she felt something stir within her. Similar to when she arrived at the spirit world, she felt at home, but there was more. Frowning for a moment, Shiro decided to test something out. Mum, am I able to use one of my skills here? Shiro asked, just in case it wasn't allowed. Yes, you may, though it depends on which skill. Oh, just a transformation, one similar to yours? Seeing her mother nod her head, Shiro activated her true. Spirit nature as a black and green dress appeared on her body with a veil flowing behind her. Glancing at her stats, her suspicions were confirmed. Her spirit nature didn't have a time limit in this place. Oh my, I didn't think you'd have something similar to the Reaper form. Mio raised her eyebrow in surprise. This is my true spirit nature, Mum. Normally it'll be on a 1-minute limit, but in here it seems to not have a limit, Shiro explained, while moving her hand around. After a minute she could sense her form shimmer for a moment, but held strong. Yep, it doesn't run out. Shiro shrugged. Interesting. Mio touched her chin as she glanced at Shiro's form. Well, your grandparents might be able to tell you more about it, I suppose. Mio shrugged, pointing towards a large oriental mansion. In the distance, Mio snapped her finger as tens of phantoms approached them and kneeled down. A red aura wrapped around their body as they now looked human with black dresses. Welcome back, young miss. Master and mistress has been waiting for you, one of the phantoms said as Mio nodded her head. Prepare 2 rooms for my daughter and her friend. We may be staying for a little longer, Mio ordered as the phantoms nodded their heads. Understood. Disappearing from their spot, Mio gestured for Shiro and Nantien to follow them. Following behind Mio, Shiro glanced around at her surroundings curiously. Trying to sense the mana in the surroundings, Shiro realized that the ambient energy wasn't exactly mana, as it was more similar to her celestial energy, rather than anything. It wasn't godly energy, like divine energy, but it was more powerful than mana. Pushing open the door, Mio led them through a few rooms before arriving at a large set of finely carved doors. Right then, my parents are just past this door. Are you ready? Mio asked with a smile. Nodding her head, Shiro took a deep breath and prepared herself mentally. Smiling at this, Mio opened the door. Sitting on 2 great thrones, 2 elderly people narrowed their eyes at them. Welcome home, Mio. I had expected my granddaughter, but who's this with her? The elderly man asked as he rested his cheek on his hand. He had long gray hair as well as a black robes. His dark red eyes swept over them as a feeling of pressure crashed into all of them. However, to his surprise, none of them are fazed, which caused him to grin. Ho, mental fortitude is rather good, the elderly said as the elderly woman nodded her head. It's Mio's daughter, after all. Though I am curious as to who the young man is. Care to take off that mask? The elderly woman asked as Nantien nodded his head. Ranob. Taking off his mask, the elderly woman raised her eyebrow for a moment before smiling. Right then. Mio, I believe you said that your daughter was called Kuromi, right? The elderly man asked as he stood up and walked towards them. Ah, yes, about that. She ran into an accident, and it seems like the system has renamed her to Shiro. Mio smiled as the elderly man nodded his head and walked in front of Shiro. So you're called Shiro now? He asked as Shiro nodded her head. What shall I call you? Gramps? Shiro asked as Mio paused for a moment but decided to say nothing just yet. Gramps sound pretty good. He grinned. But if you're called Shiro, you wouldn't happen to know Hades now, would you? Because I heard quite a few interesting things about a person called Shiro from him. We're acquainted. Shiro shrugged. As carefree as he described. He did mention that you were quite nonchalant in front of a few of the gods. The elderly laughed as he patted Shiro's head. So why did you want to meet me, Gramps? Shiro asked curiously. Should I tell her, or should you tell her? The elderly man asked the woman on the throne. You can, she chuckled. Right, so we wanted to see you because we noticed that your connection to souls has advanced past a certain point. It's hard for people to advance to this stage outside in the real world, so we were curious as to who you were as a person, and we're not disappointed so far. He laughed as he picked up. Ooh-ah! Crying out in shock, Shiro didn't expect a sudden burst of strength from him as she wasn't able to react in time. Don't be too rough with her and tell her the real reason. Han. The woman rolled her eyes as the man shrugged. I can't even play around with my granddaughter. Fine. The reason we wanted to talk to you is because we heard from Hades that you play quite a large role in the New Age. He seemed to know that you were my granddaughter, hence why he has told me to meet you. It was just a coincidence that your mastery over souls has increased quite a bit. And I do play a rather important role, I suppose. Shiro nodded her head. If it was just that, we wouldn't have been so hasty to meet you, but after he told us that, Zeus seemed to be rather annoyed with you. We figured that we might as well meet you and give you a bit of help. Oh? What kind of help are we talking about, Gramps? I'm pretty competent myself, so if it's just Zeus, I should be okay. Shiro tilted her head. Yes, but there is a small problem. Zeus has allied herself with a queen, and he has specifically asked for the queen to eliminate you. Annoyingly, it seems like he managed to work around a few of the rules so he can target you. He frowned. To make things worse, we don't know which queen. Since you're our granddaughter, it's only natural that we were worried, the woman said, as the man nodded his head. Letting Shiro down, he went back to his throne and sat down. How about we talk about this tomorrow, Mom, Dad? We'll let Shiro digest some of the information first, Mio suggested, as the two nodded their heads. That's fine. Watching the three leave, they made sure they were along with sighing out heavily. Ugh, I think we started off too serious. The air is somewhat awkward. The elderly man sighed. He was Callus, the leader of the Reapers, and yet he wasn't able to interact with his granddaughter how he wished in fear of being despised. It's not a we, it's a you. You do realize that they wouldn't care if you're a little goofy with her, right? She seems to be the relaxed kind of girl. The woman chuckled. But if I'm too goofy, wouldn't she think I'm weird and distance herself from me? Plus, shouldn't a leader be refined? Kalis sighed as the woman shook her head. You've seen Mio's messages. You can relax around her. The woman rolled her eyes, as her husband was the type to overthink things way too much. She was called Citral, and many believed her to just be a simple helper, but in actuality, she takes care of most of the important matters, while her husband is similar to a spokesman. Are you sure? Kalis asked with a frown. Just believe me. Hace. I wanted to just run over and hug her when she cried out in shock, but since there was that young lad next to her, I didn't want to present such a shameful display. Speaking of that lad, who do you think he is for Mio to bring him along? With Shiro? Citral asked curiously. Friend? Callus replied after a short pause. I mean, perhaps, but the way young Shiro looks at him might be more. Citral chuckled as Callus frowned. Let's not be too hasty now. Last time we were too hasty and Mio ran away with someone else. Callus reminded, as Citral nodded her head. Even though it was our fault, I'm still not too keen on seeing that lad again. His declaration was rather impactful now, wasn't it? Citral forced a smile as Callus could still remember what Koji had shouted when he married his daughter. Fuck your traditions. I love Mio and we're getting married with or without your agreement. After shouting that, Koji had proceeded to flip them off and run away. Massaging his head, Callus couldn't help but sigh. Thankfully, Mio was still willing to visit home every once in a while, so that was fine. How about you try to be more relaxed around Shiro tomorrow? You can't keep this serious facade up at all times after all. Citral chuckled. If I cooked her something to eat tonight, do you think she'll relax around me? Callus asked as Citral nodded her head. Give it a go and see what happens. Citral shrugged as she was more curious at the large amounts of divine energy she could sense from Shiro. While it wasn't on the level of Hades, it was rather strange for someone like her to possess divine energy unless she was a god. Leading them to the room, Mio sat down with Nantien and Shiro. So, what did you think to your grandparents? Mio asked curiously as she rested her chin on her palm. Leaning back for a moment, Shiro thought about it and frowned. Well, I don't know. He seemed serious for one moment, then casual for another. Does Gramps have schizophrenia? Shiro asked curiously. Ha ha ha. Your grandpa is awkward like that, though he's rather charismatic on the battlefield. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be able to reign over the Reapers with such a secure throne. Mio smiled as Shiro nodded her head. Knowing your grandpa, he'll probably visit you tonight with some food or something. Mio chuckled as Shiro furrowed her brows. How come? Well, he finds it easier to talk to someone over food. Don't worry, though. Your grandpa was the one who taught me how to cook, and I can say that he's a better cook than I am. Mio smiled. Hearing this, Shiro's ears perked up for a moment as she raised her eyebrow. Gramps is a better cook than you are? She asked with confusion. Yep. I'll leave for now since I want to look for a few things. Nantien, come with me and I'll lead you to your room. Mio smiled as Nantien nodded his head. Standing up, he followed Mio as Shiro gave them a wave before laying on the floor, sighing out heavily. She closed her eyes for a moment to think about what she had found out today. First, she was part Reaper, which explained her connection to souls. Second, Hades knows her grandparents. Third, Zeus has allied with a queen to kill her. While she wasn't so worried about this, it was still going to be annoying since she was against both a queen and a god. You seemed stressed, Nimue said as Shiro shrugged. A little, I guess. I didn't expect Hades to know Gramps and that they were Reapers. Shiro shrugged. Well, they seem kind, so it should be fine. Plus, you have a decent relationship with Hades, no? Though it's a shame that Poseidon was so petty to actually give you more blessings. If not, you could have gotten more from Hades. Nimue sighed. Well, that's in the past now. I have my own divinity, so it's fine. Shiro shook her head. I think I'm just going to sleep for a bit. I don't know how long it's been since I properly slept a day away. Shiro yawned as Addie reached out to her in the mana realm. Ranuism? You want to come out too? Shiro asked curiously. Nodding his head, Addie hugged her leg while glancing up at her, feeling as though an arrow had just struck her heart from how cute he was. Shiro brought him outside. Do you three want to join too? Shiro turned to Nimue, Izuel, and Estrella. I'll be fine in here. Estrella smiled as Shiro raised her eyebrow. You know that I've already forgiven you, right? If you want to come out, you can. Plus, you can also help me by keeping Addie company. Shiro said as Estrella paused for a moment before eventually nodding her head. I understand. Heis. It's not an order. Shiro rolled her eyes as she gently knocked Estrella's head. Summoning her out, she glanced at the other two. I'll come too. Izuel smiled, since she didn't mind looking after Addie in that time. Same with me, Nimue said while shrugging her shoulders. Summoning everyone out into the room, Shiro hugged Addie while sitting down on the bed. Just a thought. Are you sure we're allowed here? Nimue asked. I'm sure it'll be fine. Nantien is able to follow after all. Shiro yawned slightly and laid on the bed. Do you want to sleep too, or do you want to play with Nimue and the others? Shiro asked as Addie glanced between her and the spirits. Furrowing his brows, he snuggled into the bed and closed his eyes. Of course, he'd want to spend more time with his mum. Nimue chuckled as Shiro smiled. Well, I'll just be sleeping for a little while. If you need me, give me a shout or nudge me. I won't be in deep sleep, so I'll wake up. Shiro said as Nimue nodded her head. Watching Shiro close her eyes and sleep next to Addie, the three spirits smiled and glanced at each other. Looking at her like this almost makes me forget that she's the mighty destroyer of common sense, Nimue thought with a chuckle while glancing out of the window. But just as she did that, she noticed Kalis crouching with a confused gaze. Before she could say anything, Kalis placed a finger over his lips and gestured for them to come outside, glancing. At each other, the three spirits nodded and stepped out the room. I suppose Shiro is resting for now, then, Kalu said as he placed a noise-canceling barrier around them. Yes, she is. She had been quite fatigued, hence why she decided to rest. For now, Nimue replied with a respectful bow. Yeah, so who are you three and who's the kid in her bed? Kalis asked curiously. Glancing at one another, the spirits thought about it for a moment before replying, I suppose you can call us her retainers in a way. I'm connected through her with a contract, and I'm responsible for making sure her body is in good condition. Nimue smiled as Kalis nodded his head. What about you two? I suppose we are connected, but we don't play as big a role as Nimue here. You can just call us her friends. Izuel smiled as Estrella hesitated for a moment before nodding her head. I see. What about the kid in her bed, then? He's another spirit, but due to the circumstances of his birth, you can say that Shiro is his adoptive mother. Nimue explained as Kalis raised his eyebrow. So you're saying that he's my great-grandson? Kalis asked, just to make sure as the three nodded their heads. Suddenly the door opened with Shiro leaning against the doorframe. You know, when I said that I was resting, it means I would notice when Gramps glanced through the window. What are you four talking about so sneakily that you even need this barrier? Shiro asked as she tapped the barrier with her finger and shattered it apart. Widening his eyes in surprise, Kalis couldn't believe what he had just seen. After all, his granddaughter was actually able to shatter one of his barriers at such a low level. Your grandfather was just curious as to who we were and who Addie was, Nimue replied with a smile. Oh, you're talking about that. Well, this one is Nimue, this one is Izuel, and this one is Estrella. They're all my friends, and Addie here is my son. Shiro introduced casually as Kalis nodded his head. Does your mother know about your son? He asked. Oh, she knows about my two daughters, but not my son. Speaking of which, I should probably introduce him to her, Shiro mused to herself as she stepped away from the door. Want to come inside, Gramps? Shiro asked as Kalos nodded his head. Walking inside, he sat down next to the table and brought some food out of his inventory. Just like what Mum said he would do, Shiro thought with a chuckle. Feel free to eat anything you want. Shall we have a small chat? Kalis asked as Shiro nodded her head. Of course, it would be rude of me to say no. I just want to ask about how your mother has been doing. Is she happy with that Koji brat? Kalis asked as Shiro laughed, hearing that her father was actually called Brat. Yes, she is. Dad is doing his part as a good husband, I suppose, ha ha ha. I see. If he ever bullies your mother, tell me, okay? Kalis said while giving her a small talisman of sorts. This will let you communicate with me. If you need help, this can also summon my power for a short time in order to deal with the dangers that you face, Kalis said as Shiro nodded her head. Despite the somewhat strict and serious introduction, Shiro couldn't help but find that her Gramps was acting rather cute without his serious display. Spending the next few moments to talk about some of her adventurers over some food, Kalis listened patiently, as her tales were rather impressive, which made him feel pride as a grandfather. Ah, right, your grandmother wanted me to ask you about something, Kalis said as Shiro tilted her head. What did she want to ask? She wanted to ask about how you obtained divine energy, since only gods should have access to that. Oh, Granny is worried about that, huh? Shiro said as Callus stifled a laugh. If she heard you call her Granny, I don't know if she'll be happy or annoyed. Ha ha. Callus laughed as Shiro tilted her head. Why? She doesn't like to be called Granny. However, since you're her grandchild, I'm sure she wouldn't mind. Callus replied as Shiro shrugged. We can ask her later. So she wanted to know why I have divine energy, right? Well, after meeting Hades and doing the god trials, I managed to ascend into the status of demigod. If I want, I can activate my skill to become a demigod now, Shiro said as Callus shook his head. It's fine, I can believe it, seeing as though you have 3 energies in your body. But let me ask this. Why do you not use the second energy or the third one often? You can tap into them, you know? Callus asked as Shiro sighed. Well, for the second one, I was only able to use it after I lost my mana in a quest. It's a bit annoying to use, so I haven't used it often. For the third, I thought I couldn't use it unless I was in demigod form. Shiro frowned. Of course you can use it. It's not limited to just your form. It's like saying you suddenly can't swing a sword when you learn a spell. Just because you got a form with it doesn't mean you can't use divine energy unless you are in that form. As you can see, I'm using divine energy right now, but I'm not in a demigod form, Callus explained as he waved his hand. Suddenly, a swirl of energy wrapped around his hand as Shiro raised her eyebrow. You're a demigod, Gramps? Shiro asked as Callus shook his head. I'm not that lucky. Since we work rather closely with Hades, we get a few benefits. One of them is that we're allowed to use a certain amount of divine energy. Hence why it's rather confusing to see that you don't use it since it's one of your main tools. Callus shrugged. How do you know I don't use it, though? Shiro asked. I can see some of your energy channels? Callus smiled as he pointed to his red eyes. As Reapers, we can see both energy and souls. Naturally, I can see that you use mana more often than you use the second or third energy. How about Gramps? Teach you a trick or two so that you can make the most out of your energy? Caluso smiled as Shiro's eyes seemed to shine with excitement. Sure. Seeing this, Callus couldn't help but grin as the two started to discuss some plans, while Nimue sighed and face-palmed. Seeing their expressions, it reminded her of seeing 2 scheming foxes, one big and one small. She could already feel a headache, coming as she ran out of things to throw in the mana realm. Unfortunately, throwing islands was rather difficult, so she couldn't live her dream of throwing islands just yet. Suddenly, she felt a pat on her back as she glanced back and saw Izuel, looking at her with an apologetic smile. Like you said to Shiro, take this moment to just relax for now and take your mind off things. After you take a break, throwing tables should be rather enjoyable again. Izuel chuckled as Nimue rolled her eyes. Thank you for your gracious advice, Nimue said, but there was a small smile on her face. Mom said that we were going to stay for around a week, so maybe I can try to get used to the new energy in a week, Shiro said as Callus shook his head. When she says a week, she means several months. You know, since we work rather close with Hades, we have special pocket dimensions where time moves a little faster. Normally it's used to interrogate souls, but we can use it for training. Callus smiled as Shiro nodded her head. Shall we tell Mum then? Shiro asked. Of course. I also need to ask your grandma if we can use the pocket dimension since we're interrogating a few people right now. Callus nodded his head. Oh? Who are you interrogating? Shiro asked curiously. Just some betrayers of gods in the dungeons. They violated a few rules and made pacts with a few of the evil factions. Our roles are to extract the information from them, then release them back to the gods. Callus shrugged. Ren obeys. Oh, speaking of which, I have something similar, I suppose. I even have a warden to help me torture the souls when I don't have time to do it myself, Shiro said as she tapped her finger on the table and brought out the lantern. Seeing the lantern, Callus raised his eyebrows but frowned when he sensed who was inside it. But ha ha ha, you old goat. No wonder this girl could control souls so well. You two actually know each other. The ancient terror laughed out as Callus narrowed his eyes. You know him, Gramps? Shiro asked curiously. I don't just know him. I was the one who helped seal him away for a little while. But with how he is, it's rather difficult to completely get rid of him. How did you even deal with his mortal body? Callus asked. She sent it to space. But to think you two are actually related. You old goat, you're actually her Gramps. Ha 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 ha. The ancient terror grinned. Shut up. Shiro narrowed her eyes and zapped. His soul. Ah, fine, you violent woman. The ancient terror gritted his teeth as Callus chuckled. You actually tamed him, Callus said with a smug smile. She didn't tame me. Who, how? If you didn't get tamed, why are you her little soul warden now? If she didn't tame you, shouldn't you be able to get out by now? Callus smirked as the ancient terror only grumbled but stayed silent. Anyways, I'm quite surprised that you actually got this guy. He'll be quite useful as a torture device, I suppose. Callus smiled as Shiro nodded her head and was about to dismiss the lantern when the ancient terror called out, Wait. I got more information from that Gil kid. Oh? Yeah, he said something about a god not forgiving us if we kill him. Seems like his patron has already run into some trouble, or else you would have had to deal with an avatar of sorts when you killed him, the ancient terror said as Shiro raised her eyebrow. Who did he say his god was? Shiro asked. Light god Ikari. He helped improve the little twerp's ability to copy skill elements and the such. Seems like the light god wanted to raise him as a champion or something. The ancient terror replied as Shiro narrowed her eyes. You seem to have some history. For this god, Kayla said as Shiro nodded her head. A little mortal enemy of mine? When the new age arrives, he's my main target, Shiro replied as Kalis raised his eyebrow. Do you need help with that? I can ask for a few favors from Hades? It's fine, I can deal with it. Plus, Nantien and the party will help if anything serious happens. Shiro shrugged. If you need any help, just tell me and your grandma. We can deal with it if you have any trouble. Plus, with the new age around the corner, we'll be able to go to the mortal real with a proper reason, I suppose. Your mother can travel freely since she doesn't have a role like ours, but there are still some restrictions, Kayla said as Shiro nodded her head. Talking for a little longer, they saw Mio returning with a smile on her face. Seems like you have a little talk with Shiro, Mio said as Kalis nodded his head. If you don't mind, I'm going to be borrowing Shiro for a while. I want to take her to one of the pocket dimensions to help her with a bit of her training, Kalis said as Mio nodded her head. I don't mind, but we need to ask Mom, don't we? I'm sure she doesn't mind. I'm more concerned about how much time you have here since you'll need to go back soon, don't you? Kalis asked. We're fine for a while. Plus, it's for Shiro's benefit, so I'm sure it's fine. Mio smiled as Kalis nodded his head. Talking for a little while, Kalis made his way out as he was, going to ask his wife about the pocket dimension.